So hi everyone, I hope you can hear me fine. We're going to be starting this meeting now, and then anyone else that joins us will just join us in the middle. So this is almost like a round table, similar to what we had a few days ago as part of the festival, where we discussed the possibility of creating a Nigeria bestsellers list. My name is Teniola. I think in this case, I will describe myself as both the director of the Abuja Literature and Arts Festival, but then a researcher on all things to do with African human security. I'm also quite interested in the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, and I do some research on that as well. So I'd like to introduce our panelists. We have, first of all, Tola Onayemi. I believe he's in the room already. Tola is a lawyer, and he serves as the Chief Executive Officer of Nurbase, a company making starting, scaling, and operating a business across Africa easy and seamless. We need a lot of that. He formerly served as Assistant Chief Negotiator for Nigeria and Head Trade Remedies and Investigating Authority at the Nigerian Office for Trade Negotiations. Tola is also the winner of the Future Africa Awards 2019 prize in public service. He previously co-founded Future Africa, a fund focused on helping innovators convert Africa's biggest challenges to opportunities. In furtherance of the mandates of the Federal Executive Council and the Nigerian Economic Management Team, Tola works with a global law firm to develop a trade remedies infrastructure for protecting the Nigerian economy from injurious and unfair trading practices from foreign countries and companies. So you're very welcome, Tola. I mean, Tola's bio is very long. I mean, we may not be able to get through the entire thing, but then the most important thing is to know that Tola used to work with the NOT, and that's the National Office for Trade Negotiation, and he was at the forefront of negotiating the AfCFTA. And he's also worked with the Presidential Enabling Council on Presidential Enabling Business Environment Council, or PEBEC. I think I got to know Tola, first of all, some years ago when I supported the NIPC on something to do with improving the business environment. Now, very quickly, I'm going to move on to the next panelist. His name is Francis Anatogu. You're very welcome, Francis. I mean, Francis is now my boss, so one of my bosses, if I can say that, because I work with him a bit. So Francis Anatogu is a senior special assistant to the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria on public sector matters and Secretary of the Nigeria's National Action Committee on the AfCFTA. In that role, he heads the secretariat that coordinates Nigeria's implementation of the AfCFTA. He was the secretary of the Presidential Committee that conducted impact and readiness assessments and stakeholder engagement that resulted in Nigeria joining the African Continental Free Trade Area. In earlier roles, prior to joining the public sector, he advised companies in the energy and communications sectors on strategy, operations improvement, and project management. Francis started his career in the oil and gas industry, which is quite interesting, with international companies and worked in diverse roles across the exploration and production value chain around the world. He studied mechanical engineering at the University of Nigeria, Nsukka, and has an MBA from the George Business School, University of Cambridge. You're very welcome, Francis. It's a pleasure to have you here, and we're glad that we're speaking directly to the policymakers on this topic. I'm now going to introduce Onyinye Chikwendu. So Onyinye is a seasoned legal practitioner with several years of experience as a company secretary, legal advisor, transaction negotiator, and a contract management expert. Her experience also spans representation of clients in a plethora of high-profile criminal and civil litigation matters before courts of record in Nigeria. Onyinye is currently the practice manager at Omaplex Law Firm and the team lead of the International Trade and Commerce Department of the firm. Her proven track record of outstanding accomplishments in diverse areas of legal practice, corporate business law, and international trade practices, as well as on government policy and regulations locally and internationally, is second to none. With this drive, she ensures that her team produces excellent and outstanding results. She is a member of the Nigerian Bar Association and the section on business law of the Nigerian Bar Association. You're very welcome, Onyinye. It's a pleasure to have you. Omaplex is one of our partners for the festival, so we are glad to have you contribute to this panel. And finally, we are introducing Tese Uhomoibhi. She's an international services trade expert, but she's also a poet. I think we need to mention that because she's been a big part of the festival so far. She's working on the African Continental Free Trade Agreements. She's a recent graduate of the MA Poetic Practice program from Royal Holloway, University of London. She's also a performance poet and storyteller. She uses fairy tales, African folklore, and nursery rhymes to explore childhood trauma. She has work published in Rewilding, an eco-poetic anthology, mother tongue anthology, Perverse Magazine, Awestruck, and at the National Poetry Library. She's on Twitter and Instagram, and we can share her handles later. So you're very welcome, to everyone on the panel. I mean, from the bios that we've read, I believe that you can see that everyone here has authority on the issue of the AfCFTA and just what creatives can benefit from it. So the title of this panel is Creatives and the AfCFTA, and I think it goes right to the point. And the question is, we have the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, and I'm going to invite Francis to introduce the agreement very shortly. But then, even as negotiations are rounding up for the first phase, what do creatives need from a particular protocol, which is a trade and services protocol that speaks more to the kind of outputs that they produce? I'd like to start with Francis, Mr. Francis. You're the head of the National Action Committee for the AfCFTA for Nigeria. Would you mind, in very simple words, explaining the AfCFTA to us and what exactly creatives need to know about the AfCFTA?
Okay, thank you very much, Tani. Good evening, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I'm pleased to be here. So thank you for organizing this. This goes to build upon our rich culture, which arts and culture, which it's an area that, yes, we are rich, but we now need to take it to the global stage. So I'm happy that you guys, I'm happy for this initiative. On the AfCFTA, essentially, the Africa Continental Free Trade Area is about improving trade amongst ourselves in Africa. And why is it important? On one hand, trade is a very powerful tool for engagement and interaction, and it builds a powerful connection among nations. But for us in Africa, more importantly, is it helps to boost our economy. For other regions of the world, like Europe, 68% of their trade is among themselves in the European Union, compared to 15% for us in Africa. What AfCFTA offers is a set of rules to enable that trade. Now, how will it work in practice? For trade in goods, and arts has the goods element, your artifacts and so on, and of course the services element, the intangibles. For trade in goods, it's about liberalizing trade in 90% of tariff of tradable items. So in simple terms, removing import duties on 90% of tradable items. It also, but for that to happen, it places a threshold for the content that must be African. So that's the rules of origin. Now, for trade in services, is about harmonizing regulation, policies, and laws of state parties, so that the trade can be easier. Yes, we say that AfCFTA is the largest trade area in the world by number of countries and population. But what that also means is that you're bringing together 54 different jurisdictions and different ways of doing things. So the AfCFTA provides a platform to start to break down those silos, operations in silos, in terms of our standards, in terms of recognizing our certificates, in terms of double taxation treaty, in terms of even other regulations in what does it take to operate in African countries. But also there's a phase 2, which is just kicking off, which talks about protocol on investment, competition policy, as well as intellectual property rights. Intellectual property rights is very critical for the art world, or the creative arts world in general. It's important for everybody, but especially for creative arts world, so that you can actually retain the rights to your creations and earn out of your creations. So this is essentially bringing providing this set of rules for this to happen. And I think when we're talking AfCFTA, going back to the basis, it's important to understand. Okay, before I said that, in the phase one under trade in services, AfCFTA will be liberalizing 5 sectors: financial services, transportation, communication services, business services, as well as travel and tourism. Again, travel and tourism, business services, there's a lot of creative arts content in these. And it's important when thinking about AfCFTA to think about the 4 modes of services supply. Which there are some of the services that you will offer from Nigeria here, so without even traveling to the country. There's the consumption abroad. When you travel, there are Nigerian businesses that will decide to establish subsidiaries in foreign countries. And also there are people that would go and, for instance, when you're having your exhibitions or when operating from another countries, there are rules around, there's a mode of supply around that. So really understanding all of this and streamlining the rules so that it is easier for people to trade across borders, which first of all improves the trade volume, but it should decrease the costs and the hassle of trading amongst ourselves. I'll stop here, and I know my colleague Tola would have some 1 or 2 other things to add to this.
Thank you very much, Francis. I mean, that was a very good overview of the AfCFTA and some of the things. If you can hear me, so for Tola, you know, I know you were at the forefront of negotiations, and you knew exactly what some of what Nigeria's offerings were. Would you mind speaking to the specific issue of
can you hear me? I seem to keep. Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I think your audio keeps coming in and out. We'll go on.
Okay, yeah, sorry about that. What were some of the main considerations for Nigeria in terms of negotiating the trade in services protocol? You know, because we know that when it comes to services, there's a lot of focus on the financial guys. To what extent would you say that, you know, the creative sector was considered in the negotiations?
Right. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Teniola. And I'm happy to be here. Been a big fan of the Literary Festival for a while. I think physically attended, I think 2 years ago. So great, happy to be here. It's also good to be along very familiar faces. Mr. Francis is here. We worked together for quite a while. Tese is here. Well, very good friend. So yeah, so it's a colleague. I guess Mr. Simon Bar. So it's great to be in very familiar territory with people who play different roles in ensuring that we have the trade regime that we have today. So I'll jump in a bit quickly, and thanks a lot for setting that framework out, Mr. Francis. So in conducting negotiations, I think one of the most important things that was important to do, and I think I just set a general broad context, you know, of what the AfCFTA tries to do, and I think Mr. Francis has set out a big picture. But then the AfCFTA is simple. It's that Africa already does a lot of trade, right? But that trade is of three major forms. One is it's either not sophisticated, meaning it's very raw, and so it's not getting the high value that you can get out of it. And an easy way to explain that is to think of the fact that 38% of the world's cocoa production comes from Cote d'Ivoire, and Cote d'Ivoire makes $3.7 billion from cocoa in a year. But Mars supplies just 14% of the world's chocolate and makes $37 billion. That's 10 times what the entire country makes by supplying 14% of a component, right? So that's the first big problem. The second big problem is that when we do trade, however, it's also a lot with people that we have colonial history with. So Nigeria does a lot of trade with the UK, probably more than we do with South Africa, for instance, right? And all of that. So that's like the second big bulk of consideration, which is that a lot of our trade is with like those that we have a colonial relationship with. And the third big broad problem, right, that the AfCFTA tries to fix is to try to create a framework for progressively reducing tariffs across the continent. So the idea is that tariffs are high today, and it's not supposed to be a big bang. It's supposed to be to create a framework for progressively reducing tariffs across the continent. Now, let's jump a bit into what the services segment does, right? So there are two big broad negotiations for goods, right? There's goods for products. There's goods and the services, right? Goods covers, as you know, tangibles, physical goods, and I think it's important to note that art and creative materials can fall under goods or services, right? And it's important that we don't make that assumption that they're all always going to be under services, right? And I'll give an example. If someone did wrote an anthology and it's published as a book, it's no longer a service, right? In that sense, it's actually a good because it's a book. They are sent across the continent, right? So the form in which that art form is packaged determines whether it's a good or it's a service and which of those classes it falls under. I think it's important to first make that very broad, important distinction. But in services more specifically, what we tried to do during the negotiation, right, and was to actually have, and the negotiations were at three levels. I think Jonathan also said that they were at the ministers, the ministers stage. There was the technical working groups and the negotiating forums. What happens when negotiating forums came up with the actual draft of agreement and where they cascaded upward, right? But the truth is, even coming up with the draft the negotiating forums came up with, and particularly in Nigeria's case, if I had to shout out the late Ambassador Teniola who shared this entire process, right? One of the things we tried to do was to get actual groups, associations, right? And so we had a lot of associations that were approved by the presidency that include component players in those different sectors. So for instance, in financial services, we had like bank payment processors come and make inputs, right? And we had a bunch of that for a lot of things. So for instance, I know that we engaged with the Arts Society of Nigeria. I know we engaged with them. We engaged with, I'm trying to remember the name of this other organization now, where we had their head. So I had a bunch of these kind of organizations come and tell us what they cared about the most and the things that mattered the most to them, right? And a lot of things that mattered the most to them fell under issues that related a lot to intellectual property and how you could protect that long term. The important thing to say is that intellectual property is still being negotiated, right? It's not all finalized yet. It's one of those inbuilt negotiations. And also because the WTO rules has some imports on what applies as it relates to intellectual property. And that's because the TRIPS agreement applies to almost all the members that make up the AfCFTA are also members of WTO. And so the TRIPS agreement already sets out a regime. And if you know what the TRIPS agreement does, it's something called the TRIPS Plus, which basically says that there's a minimum threshold that you can do for intellectual property, and you can choose to build on it. And so one of the big debates at the AfCFTA level was, what position does the AfCFTA want to take as it relates to intellectual property? Do you want to go TRIPS Plus, where you are giving an higher threshold than the WTO, or are you giving a lower threshold than the WTO? Right. The truth is that because a lot of creative content comes a lot from Nigeria, there's an instinct for Nigeria to want to go for a plus, right? So for example, when you look at the fact that movies across the continent, music across the continent, even performing art across the continent has a very massive Nigerian footprint. One of the things that you see that there's a push for Nigeria to have a TRIPS Plus type position, which basically means you're saying, listen, give us a bit more protection than the TRIPS agreement does, right? So that way, at least across the continent, we have an higher threshold of protection that applies to our own creative work. And that seems to be the way the negotiations seem to be as at now. I think two other things important to say is that it's always important that associations and bodies like this make inputs into the process. A lot of them made input, and the input process always continues, right? Because this negotiation, like I said, it's not a big bang, right? It's a progressive process where you keep making inputs and you keep making inputs and you keep making inputs, right? But I think one important thing to say is that where this negotiations end also determine to a great extent the format in which you want to put out your work. So for instance, there's a distinction between a movie and a CD or a movie that is streaming. And that in itself, that distinction can make it fall between whether it's a good or whether it's services, right? Or maybe it's performing something over a Zoom call or performing it in, say, a packaged material. And those kind of important things already have different implication of rules that apply to them. So for instance, if I were making if I was making I think of an example. If I made a good book, for instance, that has poetry, or one of those Chimamanda's books, for instance, and I was sending it across the continent, it applies as goods. And already, if I can show some level of transformation that went into it. So e.g., it's published in Nigeria, it's written by Nigeria, and all of that work, it enjoys some certain distinctive protection as against it was a case where she was doing a reading. And it is important to also make those kind of distinctions in how we classify what goes forward. Yeah. I just want to get that broad picture, and that's it. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Tola. I can see that, there's a lot of discussion about intellectual property. And I like to, for example, refer to the fact that, we see ourselves as an oil exporting economy, but one of the things that we also export a lot is Nigerian culture in form of entertainment. So we go to many countries in Africa and they know about Nollywood, they see Nigerian movies. But
Tenny,
can you hear me?
Sorry, it was cutting out. If you could maybe move a bit closer, I don't know, but
is it better now?
Yes, it's better now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Tese. So yes, I was saying that Nigerian movies are consumed across the continent, but then one thing that we're sure of is that the consumption of Nigerian movies in other African countries often do not translate to more money in the accounts of the Nigerian movie producers, because a lot of the time they are pirated. So thank you for explaining about intellectual property, and I think Francis was also good to introduce it in that way. Now, Tessie, actually, I want to come to you because you're a poet, right? So you're very firmly in the creative space as well as in the policy space. And beyond what Francis and Tola have already spoken to, what do you think maybe some of the other considerations that need to be given to creatives and the different kinds of outputs that they produce with the AfCFTA negotiations?
Thank you, Tenny. And it's really great to see everyone here, people that I've worked with in the past and people that I've had a lot of experience and working alongside, like Tola. So yes, with regards to I'm not going to repeat anything that has been said previously by the previous panelists, because I think that they've really gone in depth and really given a good solid basis for understanding what is relevant and important for creatives within the AfCFTA agreement. But I would like to kind of focus on some other areas. So like with regards to services, there are different modes of supply, right? Within services, which is basically the different ways in which you share or transmit or distribute services and in which you supply them to consumers for their consumption. And so one of the four modes of supply, actually the fourth mode of supply, is the movement of people. Movement of natural citizens. And so basically what this means is this fourth mode of supply kind of is important, I think, especially for creatives, because if we are, for example, we've talked a bit about the creation of products like books and physical works of art, really, that can be sold, and that falls under goods. But then when you talk about presentations or performances or exhibitions, these kind of things, these kind of ways of sharing creative work and supplying creative work, that would typically fall under this fourth mode of supply, because that requires you to move from one place to another, usually to give and to supply that form of art, that form that form of arts, that part of your creativity to people. And so when it comes to the CFTA, right, in general, when it comes to trade agreements, typically this fourth mode of supply is usually kind of focuses on professionals, people who are qualified in certain ways, that are pretty very probably have like professional qualifications like doctors and scientists, engineers, lawyers, accountants, people like that have large traditional institutions and bodies kind of guiding their qualifications and stuff. And so it tends to focus on them, like, okay, like if you're if you want to liberalize that fourth mode of supply, you want to make it easier for people who are providing these kind of services to be able to go from one country to another to provide those services. But if it's only really focusing, as it does typically tend to do, focusing on scientists or like scientists or doctors or people that, that have these larger professional bodies, where do creative professionals come into this? Especially when we have such a diverse range of skills, like less of an organized, centralized body that kind of demarcates what qualifies us and determines whether we are qualified to provide that service. Where do creative professionals really come into this space? And so I think that right now, I know because I have headed committees, was a subcommittee regarding trade and services, and in the AfCFTA, I know that right now, recently, a subcommittee has been created for the development of mutual recognition for professional qualifications. And so this subcommittee basically is trying to figure out how we can kind of develop a common common standards, common qualifications that will allow people from different African countries to recognize the qualifications that someone has in one country, and that will allow that person, as a citizen of another AfCFTA country, to be able to practice in any country in the continent and to be able to deliver their services in any country in the continent. And so what does that mean for us? What does that mean now? We basically, and this is very early on in the process, right? Right now, we are rounding up on the first stage of negotiations, the first round of negotiations really for services. We're about to move into the next 5 sectors, well, at least 5 sectors for services liberalization. And so what that means is that we will be able to kind of like look at, with this body, we're looking for like what those qualifications need to be. And I think that this is really, there's a huge opportunity here for creatives and creative professionals to make their voices heard and to make sure that we're not left behind and we're not forgotten about in the creation of these mutual recognition agreements, basically. MRAs is what they're kind of making. And so in these mutual recognition agreements that they're trying to develop that will allow us to be able to have our qualifications as creative professionals recognized in other African countries, so that we can then have the opportunity to go to these African countries and be able to sell our services, supply our services in different places. So I think that that's maybe something that I find really interesting, that is a new opportunity that kind of exists within the agreements that really allows us right now to be able to give that input, because these mutual recognition agreements have not been made yet. They're very early in the process. And so now is the time for our inputs to be given. And especially as Tola kind of mentioned earlier, as literary groups or like as other artistic organizations and collectives, to make our voices known, so that they'll be able to kind of take our feedback on board and make sure that they make room and create opportunities for creative professionals as the CFTA moves forward.
Thank you so much for that. I mean, that's a new angle that you've brought in, or an additional dimension that you've brought in. It's quite important. And that is exactly what this panel is supposed to do, to identify some of the areas that the input of practicing creatives can, the input that they can provide to the negotiations as they are ongoing. I'd like to come back to you, sometime before we wrap up, to ask some more about what you think maybe the next steps in terms of trying to gather that input. We have Francis right here, so it would be good to be able to have that discussion directly. But for now, I'd like to go to Onyinye. Onyinye, so you're a practicing lawyer in Nigeria, as well as Tola, but I'd like to hear from you in terms of the state of Nigeria's laws, and given everything that we've discussed so far with intellectual property and the different protections that we think Nigerian creatives will need in the context of trading under the AfCFTA. Do you think that there's going to be a lot of ground to cover, for our laws, to be able to provide the kinds of protections that we need? Because one thing I've learned about the agreement also is that, it has to be domesticated, it has to be localized, and it means that we cannot be asking for things on the continental level that even our laws within Nigeria do not provide for. So over to you.
Thank you so much, Tenny. Good evening, everybody. I'm glad to be here and to lend my voice to this conversation. And I just want to also commend all the contributors to the AfCFTA. I think that some of us in actual practice, we find that sometimes all these ideas, all these laws, they're fantastic, but oftentimes the will to get them working, to actually make impact, is lacking. But I think for this particular, when I saw this agreement come up, I was like, okay, so another thing comes up. So how are we going, if we can't coordinate a single nation, how are we able to coordinate an entire continent? So, but I think that the amount of work and how much the political will and also the will of individuals here to get things moving is quite commendable. So I commend everybody. And I also want to say that the area and the agreement, I find it to be, it doesn't do everything we need to do. And I guess that's why the negotiations are going on. But I think it's a step in the right direction that creates the ability for us to actually have a conversation and try to make things better. So kudos to everybody. And so my input on this will be, from a practicing perspective, I find that I shudder to think the work that will be, hard to make things work, because even in Nigeria, IP protection is not the best, and for creatives more or less, because I think in Nigeria we tend to think of the creative industry as an acquired taste. It's not like commercially, but it's not commercially accepted like banking sector or all this other sectors are. So it's more of like people who have a keen taste of poetry, of music, of arts and paintings and all of that. And so being an acquired space, and we've not really done much to really make IP protection of these kinds of services really robust. We still have a lot of ways to go on this, and that's why the pirating of movies, of work, of literary works is on the increase with little or no protection. And then that's why you see people creating awesome works and they cannot get paid. Someone is using their product and they have no credit to them. They don't even get any royalties for that use. So we still struggle here in Nigeria. So I shudder to think what other African countries, how we'll be able to come together and, set aside and say that we're going to be more, we're going to meet a certain threshold on IP protection. I don't even know if we meet the protection of chips, not talk of even increasing that threshold. But that's not to say that it is impossible. I think that we still need to do a lot of things. And I think also a lot of creatives need to understand the types of protections that are out there, that they can't oppose certain registrations, certain people using their, I also think that there's not enough knowledge of what the law in Nigeria actually protects. And also there's not enough of enforcement, in the sense that people are not keen to want to, if there's an infringement of my service or of my product, people are not keen to want to go to court to say, this is an infringement, I demand damages. But that's also to say that because the judicial system is not at its best, so I can understand the apathy to wanting to go to court for a work, and then you spend 10 to 15 years trying to pursue your claim, and you're not even sure of the outcome of that. And then you probably, the time period to get your damages or get your claims processed takes longer time, and then the commercial viability of that is dwindled. So I shudder to think how that will apply with the AfCFTA. But I'm also confident that the exposure to other countries will force us to do better, so that raises the competition on the kinds of work we put out there, and also urges practitioners to be more cognizant of the fact that these are rights that need to be protected like they are in other parts of the world. But I also want to say that with respect to IP rights and the Continental Free Trade Agreement, I hope that negotiations will move more away from harmonizing IP protection. So rather than just harmonizing the central database for where all IP matters will be directed to, that system needs to be structured. It needs to be empowered to be able to address those issues when they are raised and address them properly. And I think that's what we don't do enough of. So in my years of practice, we hardly handle a lot of infringement matters on intellectual property, especially for creatives. That I don't even think there's anything that there's any landmark case on a right that is being protected as much as there is in other industries. But that's to say that I think what the FCA can do for us is cure the problem that we have at home. I know that charity begins at home, but maybe this is another opportunity to do it on a larger scale, in the sense that because before the agreement came into place, you have to register your IP rights in your country, and then probably find another country that has reciprocity with another country. So if you divide it like that, you can cover maybe 3/4 of the African continent. And then there are other nations that don't have those coverage as a communal effort. So you now have to go to those individual states to ensure that your rights are protected across the continent. So I think what the agreement allows us to is have a central system where there is an harmony of what the IP laws would look like. And then it also creates a place where I think also that clears up registration purposes. So instead of just harmonizing, it can be a modus to address registration, so that there is no similar work like your work in the market. And then if anybody's going to do that, you probably have to be under a compulsory license, because that's also part of a provision for creators, because I know the law is not strict on trying to restrict innovation to any one person. It allows the use of your innovation, but of course with a license fee to you as well. But what I'm saying in essence is we need to not just harmonize the IP laws, we also need to have a structured organization within the AfCFTA that clears up registration and also has a uniform dispute resolution mechanism. I think the WIPO does a phenomenal job with the, what's that law? The Uniform Dispute Resolution policy of WIPO. It does a phenomenal work with Uniform Domain Name Resolution policy. I think we need to structure the IP organization in that light, so that it is able to cover not just registration, it can also provide a mechanism for dispute resolution. And that way you create a system to list and then of course we don't try to make it as litigious as we do other matters. I'm hoping that this will give us an opportunity to say for instance, you have an IP claim that somebody is infringing upon your rights in another country. You can now, what the UNDRP does, it allows you it states what you must prove to get your claim, what you must prove to sustain your claim. So we can have a situation, a forum where any creative knows that if you want to lay claim to any kind of right, these are the elements that you must prove. It's clear. It's not something that we need to sit down and look for precedent to say this is what we need to refer to. No, it's clear this is what you must prove to sustain a claim. And since that element is clearly outlined, you as a creative know what you need to do per time to be able to meet that threshold. Then also you now create a system for enforcement. So, and of course, people that you have a musician headed by experts. So you have people who understand the different IP rights, like copyright, trademark, patent, designs, all those things. So it's not a question of the person is not aware, because in Nigeria here, some of the judges are not really, they don't focus on any one matter to say I'm an IP judge expert. But this affords the ability to stack the organization with people who are sound in that practice area. And then that way, once you submit your claim, you know what you need to sustain your claim, you submit that. They look at it within a few days, they come out with a report and say you are infringement of this thing, and then of course it's automatic. That person's right is, and then I think because we have that central system, it allows for easier. It creates more. Legitimacy of your right. Also removes away all the delay that our law seems to, or our system has seemed to create for claims. So and then under the UDRP, the claims is automatic within 10 days. The issue is settled, so that claim is settled. So unlike we have to wait for 15 years and 10 years, I think that gives us a more targeted approach. It streamlines everything. Everybody knows what needs to be. And I think that this will give us, if we can't do it at home, we have a way or a system to do it as a continent. And that, I think that also provides a wider protection, it outlines things easier and makes, I think it also encourages creatives to want to put their work out there. Yeah, so that is what I think would be nice to include.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. I mean, you're right that there is going to be a bit of a ways to go. I just earlier at your office, in fact, we had a session with creative, and some of the presenters, there was one presenter from WIPO, the World Intellectual Property Organization, and then one from the NCC. And I think it's an interesting point because it's the idea of, what comes first, is it advancement or institutions? And it's the idea that, we can start to advance and then.
Sorry, I can't really hear. I'm so sorry.
I'm sorry, my audio is bad. Is it better now?
Yes, it's better now.
Okay, so yeah, the idea about what comes first, do you have good institutions that can protect intellectual property before you start to, trade services in that way, or are you forced to create those institutions because of the trading that has started? So that is quite interesting. I'm going to do a last round of questions, but then if anyone in the audience has any questions, they can please type them in the chat room or raise their hands if they want. Starting with Francis, we've spoken a bit, and then we listened to Tese and what she said. I'd like to ask, do you have any plans for engaging creatives, even as part of the work that the Secretariat does? I know that you have a lot of, sensitization workshops, and do you have any plans to engage creatives, even as Nigeria is trying to, finalize the negotiations on the trading services?
Yes, Denny. So this engagement, it has to be continuous and targeted as well. So yes, we've done a lot of sensitization, virtual sensitizations on general AfCFTA. We are moving around the states, sensitizing businesses as well. Yes, we've held workshops. Yes, we need to. We plan to have a sensitization session with creatives before the end of this year, and so the short answer is yes. But I think Onyinye's points point to the what needs to be done, and points to your question, what do we do first? The point is, part of what we need to understand is that these issues exist, and and some of them will take 5 to 10 years of dedicated effort to solve. So it's actually then getting started. I think also what we need to the negotiations on the IPR and co is still at the terms of reference stage, so we wait to see what comes out. But what I do know is that in the agreement, it maintains the right of nations to regulate. It relies on national institutions to implement, and some of the things that we are talking about that I would like to see will require in some areas, maybe some changes here and there in laws existing in some of the African countries. But really, there are some specific things that it's also obvious to me, having been on this role, which is that trading services, because you have individuals that you can offer your service and get on with your life. Yes, that is a major advantage, but that's also a major disadvantage, because most people lament about their problems, but they don't then engage with their colleagues in their associations to actually come together to try to resolve these issues. And I think that is something that a mindset change is required among all the other things that we are talking about. So, and that is something that I would really recommend that we start to do. Even this festival that we're talking about brings people together, shares ideas, and and motivates people to take action. Now, it will interest you that in the life of the WTO, no African country has taken a case to WTO. Now, the easy excuse we give is that it is expensive. But I mean, Tola is more of a specialist here than I am. But the truth of the matter is that we do not apply the RICO, and we give up that it takes 10, 15 years. And, so you don't even bother trying. People will not be encouraged if people don't then take steps. So some of these things are very, very, very difficult. They are very, very, very challenging. And this is also why we must come together and encourage one another to start to set the precedent, start to push the boundaries, really, because a good number of these are non-tariff barriers that actually stifle trade, make it more difficult, and so on. So I think this mindset change, this silo way of operation is good, but we will achieve more if we do things together. And the last thing that I'll say is that really a key word here is progressive elimination. So elimination of the barriers that we see, right? The last thing that I'll say about AfCFTA is it really, when it works well, right? It has the national treatment, which means that when we're going to any other African country, you will be treated, or you should be treated as they would treat their own locals. But these things wouldn't come just like that. This one would need to be tested. This thing would need to be pushed, because it's all non-tariff barriers. And in some cases, some of the push, you get this kind of push that we have between us and Ghana in the area of trade. These things exist and needs to be solved. So I think in a nutshell, to encourage everyone to say, yes, there's work to be done at the institutional level. There's work to be done at the continental level, but there's also work to be done at individual level, first coming together and be part of an organization, so that you can have a voice that can sound loud enough for those of us in government to take notice, for those in the legislature to take notice. And it's only when those cases start coming up then that judges will then be try to specialize. They talked about specializing in IPR or one area. I mean, when you get one case in a decade, there's no incentive for that to happen as well. So, but I think just to end, to say that it is, I'm happy we are having this, and these conversations would continue, and it can only get better if we start pushing the way, we continue the way that we have just started. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Francis. I think we've lost Tola, have we? Oh, Tola, you're here. So Tola, just a very brief comment from you, because I know that one of the things you're quite passionate about is, new ways of trading, right? So new platforms for trading. We know that one of the ways that creatives, in this case artists, have started trading their output through NFT. And potentially it may even be a way to trade art within the African continent under the AfCFTA. If you can have a very brief comment from you, what you think about that. So what do you think are the potential? What do you think is the potential of NFT, art trading as part of the AfCFTA trading? And do you think that the current provision for the trading services protocol can cover that kind of trading?
Thanks a lot. That's a very interesting question. I particularly like it. So on NFTs, I think the important thing to put in broad context is that NFTs are a bit beyond even the AfCFTA, right? Like it's using the blockchain as a way for art form. It's basically about the metaverse. It's about creating art in the metaverse and what that means for us more generally. So I think there are four broad issues that NFT throws up, right? The first issue that NFT throws up is an issue of authentication, right? One of the things that NFTs does is that it ensures the pitch of NFTs, and for those who don't know, is that where there's an argument that in the future, or there's a theory that in the future, right, the virtual reality world is going to be more significant than the physical world. And so people are saying, listen, I'm going to own art in the virtual world, right, AR, VR type art. And because of that, it's going to be authenticated on the blockchain that I own them. And so therefore I can get a lot more value for it. And right now it's like a status symbol, right? NFTs are going for as high as several ETHs, several millions of dollars when you convert to dollars. Now, it throws up four broad issues. One of the issues I think that it solves is an authentication issue, right? One of the issues we've talked about on this call a lot is IP. Blockchain does that a lot more easier, right? Because I automatically authenticate who owns what, and the person can take an infringement action a lot faster than what happens today. So for instance, if I were to use someone's NFT on the blockchain or try to infringe on it, the person would know almost immediately and can take action almost immediately. So it resolves a lot of issues around intellectual property, ownership, and infringement. That's one. I think the second broad issues that NFTs does very interesting, it actually globalizes the art industry, right? So it's like how in social media and even on TikTok and all those things today, it doesn't matter if this is a Nigerian musician. Like for instance, CK right now, right, is charting the world's chart, Spotify and Shazam on music, right? The most Shazam song in the world right now. And he's a Nigerian musician, signed Chocolate City. No, sorry, it's corrected that. Charged Universal UMG in South Africa also. And is charting global chart. And that's the second thing that NFT does for it. It globalizes the art industry. Right? So it changes from this whole idea of I need a special advantage to trade to get access into South Africa or Kenya or wherever it is. It globalizes the art form that you can do. But I think the third thing that it throws up very interesting taxation and tracking issues, right? Because blockchains are done using cryptocurrency, there's still not. So in the US, the new regime by the IRS and even in the Canadian space sets out a very clear regime for ownership and taxation of crypto gains, right? But most African countries don't have that yet. In fact, most of them are still burying their heads in the sand about what the role of NFTs and crypto is. And that throws up a very interesting set of issues, because how do you tax what you don't accept? So for instance, if I were to make an NFT, if I were to make an art for $1,000 and sell it on the blockchain for $1 million, which is what's happening now for $1 million, you can't tax it because it's all in crypto, right? It's in ETH or it's in Bitcoin. How do you tax it exactly? Especially when you're not accepting that it's a gain that I've made or it's a legitimate currency type. So that's like a third big issue. But I think the last issue it throws up, and for context, I'm a very massive art collector. I have a great art collection. I collect arts, both old and new arts, right? And the fourth big trend that I think throws up, right, is an appreciation issue. So for example, and the best way to explain it is this. I bought a certain art for a young contemporary artist recently. I bought the art for, I think, closer to $1 million, right? But less than a week after that, this guy reaches back to me and says, listen, I want to list this thing. I want to make it an NFT. And that means that I need to get the title back from you and give you a different art instead. In fact, I'm willing to give you 2 instead. And I was curious why. But the thing was, it was going to list this as an NFT and I was going to make maybe 100 times of that, right? And so it made more sense for him. And that's, I think, another thing that's going to happen, right? Because what happens is that the appreciation of art will change a bit, because now you can display it in a lot more spaces. And so NFTs themselves changes. Do I think the protocol today captures for that? I don't think so. I don't even think the WTO protocol captures for what NFTs changes for for in the space. And the truth is, there's a much more crazier things that are coming. There's pay to earn that is coming for gaming. There is there are people talking about how to list use the blockchain for even poetry and spoken word. There's a bunch of interesting ideas people are throwing around. There's a ramp off project that is being done with Nestcoin for creatives. There's a bunch of things like that. I know that Shay Taylor is doing something with Gamer for pay to earn. There's a bunch of these very interesting things that people are rolling out that change the game on how using blockchain to distribute art and literary work. And I think those things will change a lot of how we engage with them. But the first things I think they will do, like I said before, is one, they ensure that authentication is a lot easier. I know who owns what, and that changes a lot in intellectual property issues. Second is that, like I said, my music travel no visa, right? Like you can globalize art a lot faster, right? Like you don't need to go through the whole issues of the boundaries and the tariffs and all. It travels a lot faster. The third very broad issue is that taxation is going to be interesting to see how it plays out, mostly because most African governments are not even accepting that this crypto space is a legitimate universe on its own with currencies and the rest. And I think the fourth part it does is it changes the conception of how we appreciate art more generally and what that means for us more generally.
I mean, you've done justice to that, Tola. Thank you so much. So, I mean, we're trying to also stay with the times at the Abuja Literary Society. We had an NFT workshop as part of the festival. But then what is curious to me is that, the way Bitcoin is being taken up by the African continent, perhaps we see a similar thing happening with NFTs. And we know that there's a marketplace for African NFTs already. I'd like to come to you, Tese, because, I mean, even from this conversation, I'm already seeing a bit of a difficulty in terms of trying to bring creatives into the discussion about the AfCFTA, even coming from our end, right? The title of this panel is Creatives and the AfCFTA. Already, a lot of people don't even know what the AfCFTA is. So perhaps we should have called it, maybe how can Nigerian creatives sell to the African market? Because that's one way to simplify things. How do you think we can, because you're educated both in the creative space, but also in the policy space, how do you think we can better bridge the gap, in terms of dialogue between trade experts, trade law experts or trade policy experts, and creatives that may not be familiar with the terms like the IPR and even the AfCFTA? How do you think we can solve that challenge?
Thank you, Tenny. And yeah, that is a very valid concern. It's definitely something that I have faced personally as I created a clubhouse room. I co-created a clubhouse room earlier in the year just to kind of create kind of a space for young people who are not familiar with the CFTA, who don't have any experience in it or in policy or development, and trying to find the right language to really break down what the CFTA is, what it means, why it's important, why it should be important for anyone in the continent currently. That was definitely a difficulty that we kind of had to face, and it was a bridge that had to be crossed because, of course, this is a legal agreement. Yes, very much so. And so because of it, it involves the use of a lot of language that is very hard to access for people who may not be in these spaces or who may not have had the opportunity to really have past experience with these experiences, with these agreements. And then of course there's also but even though it is like this, and even though it does have this difficulty, it's very important that creatives and other people who do not have these technical backgrounds, that they are able to access the information contained within this agreement, not necessarily like, every single like word contained within the agreement, but what is relevant to them. We need to make the agreement real for them. We need to make it so that it is something that is a living, breathing agreement, because if we don't do that, this agreement will not be owned by the people that it's supposed to serve. And if it's not owned by the people it's supposed to serve, then it will not go beyond the page. There are many agreements that we have signed in Nigeria that we're signatories to that have not had the kind of effect that they were envisioned to have because they just have not been owned. There's no ownership by the people that the agreement is supposed to be made for, and there's no involvement of the private sector in the process. I think what is different so far with the CFTA is that there has been already a lot of sensitization in terms of trying to reach out to the everyday person, to members of the private sector, to average Nigerian citizens, to show them that this is an agreement that matters and that could potentially change the narrative for African people today. It could change the narrative in terms of our businesses, of our GDP. It could help us. It is very much at its core a Pan-Africanist vision, a part of the original Pan-Africanist vision of the OAU, of the Organization of African Unity, before now the AU, the African Union. And it is very much like it's a part of this dream of trying to give Africans the ability to reclaim control of our own economic narratives. Some people, like, originally they saw it as a part of the vision for kind of like a two-step part of our gaining independence. So like the political part was what we're celebrating today in Nigeria. The political part of the independence movement was reclaiming our political independence. But now the CFTA, even though it's just coming to realization now, the idea of the dream of one African market is actually from 1960, from way back when they are originally trying to see how African unity can lead to our reclaiming our own economic narratives, our own ability to kind of control our economic destinies. And so what I think is really important in terms of the CFTA and kind of breaking down that language is we need more storytellers. We need more people who understand these things, who understand the importance of the CFTA to really break it down. I think that so far those sensitization programs that have been done by the government, by organizations like NOTN and of course, Mr. Francis's organization, these the Nigerian Secretariat for the AfCFTA. I think that those kind of sensitization programs have gone a long way to really breaking it down. But I think that there needs to be even more work done. Just creating more language and creating more, like, I guess maybe even more accessible information, not just online, but also like physical, like whether it's like books, manuals, things that people can access, and also maybe working even closer with these bodies so that they can then not only be able to, come and call for, people who have these technical skills to come in and give, give a panel or give a discussion or give information on this, but so that they can actively also learn how to share the information to the people in their organizations themselves, empower these people to be able to go out to their to the members of their private sector organizations, so that the CFTA becomes something that is much easier to kind of access, to know, and so that people feel ownership over it. Like, cast the vision for the CFTA, what it's supposed to do. It's not just, okay, yes, it's liberalizing trade, but what does that mean for somebody who is, like a poet or like an artist who like maybe only really sells to like their local market? How will they see themselves in the CFTA? What are the opportunities that exist for them? Because there are opportunities that exist for them within the CFTA. And I think that this panel that we've had is kind of one way in which we can start, personalizing the CFTA. I'm going to close with a story that I read, that of an experience that I had when I was leading one of my clubhouse rooms on the CFTA. And basically what happened is that somebody came up and we were talking about the CFTA and agriculture and what it means for, people who are just, everyday people who maybe have their own subsistent farms, and, and why should they care about the CFTA? And somebody came forward and told this story about his family and like what agriculture means for him, and like what memories he associates with, like, going back with agriculture, when he hears agriculture, and why it matters and why it should be considered within the CFTA as something that is still important to African countries, even though, there's the whole discussion of perpetuating our colonial relationships and stuff that kind of goes along with it. But he talked about how he has these memories. When he thinks of agriculture, he has these memories of like going to the farm with his father and, and like going early in the morning and like, trying to like build something of their own, and then like going to the market with his mother and then like trying to like sell it. And those are like the associations, like make it personal for people basically. And I think that that's the way that we'll be able to kind of overcome the very technical aspects of the agreement, because it is a technical agreement. It's through making it personal for people, creating those connections, showing them why it matters to them specifically, and not just what is contained within the agreement, but kind of translating it to language that, makes it very relevant for them, so that it makes it easier for them to kind of pass on that information to the people that they are in community with. And that will kind of make the CFTA come alive. Thank you.
I mean, what I heard, the summary of what you said is pretty much that we need people like you to help break the AfCFTA down, because you know the language of both groups. So yes, that is very well taken. Now, a final comment from Onyinye. So, we've spoken about how there's maybe not enough information regarding the AfCFTA with the communities that need them. The National Action Committee Secretariat is doing what they can, but then there's a bit of challenges with the language and with everything. I'd like to ask, with Nigerian lawyers, do you think that they are following the everything that is going on with the AfCFTA? Because we have a lot of lawyers in Nigeria, so that means that there will be a very good point of communication for Nigerians. Do you think that they're following everything that is going on with the AfCFTA in a way to advise people that they come in touch with when it comes to issues regarding trading in services? And a brief comment, please.
Okay. Thank you very much, Tenny. I think that not a lot of us are following it. The truth about it is that I think when you're a lawyer for a number of years, you see all these fantastic ideas on paper, but in reality, not a lot of it is practical. So I think some of us are just waiting to see how the negotiations on trade services pan out, to see what is there. Because on paper, when you see, if it will work or not. And so that also demonstrates to us the seriousness of the contributors to that work. But I think that in terms of the language, I think also creatives are not very engaged in things like this. And I think that's also what spells for not a lot of understanding of some of these things. So, and then the industry is pretty underdeveloped, right? Even in your parent company and countries, not a lot of creatives not everybody is involved. In fact, one of the most things I've done in terms of creative industries are probably management of exhibitions and arts and all of those things. Not a lot of people are concerned about the protection or even of the work they produce. Not a lot of people really, and that's why I speak to the comment I made earlier regarding judges not being aware, because if you check the number of oppositions to some of the IP infringements, not a lot. And so that says that the engagement on that level is very low. Then you now also check the cases that are filed in court in respect to those types of infringement, very low. And so that also tells you that the system is pretty much underdeveloped. So even with this CFTA in play, not a lot of people are engaged in it. And I think that will, in buttressing the point of Mr. Francis, is we need to get engaged. Even no matter how, I know that it somehow seems a bit too much grammar in cognizance of in all the language. It seems a bit too much, but the truth about the matter, these are just intentions of people set down in writing. And so I also think that carrying every group and the planning and then the formatting stages of things will help, because if people are able to identify, the critics are able to identify these are the problems we're having. Even I think also some of these things are a reflection of what is not working here that we're trying to correct also on a larger scale. So early engagement of the industries affected is key. And because if you don't do that, what you now have to do is catch up type of thing. But also, I think that creators need to get more engaged. That's the only way they can understand the language, because it's not like we're going to come and have lawyers tend to focus on what a lot of interest is in, because I think that also stresses the point of, if something is talked about a lot, if something is like in the banking sector and fintech sector, they are quick to want to do a tradeback opposition of something. So I know the CBN launch of the e-Naira, the cryptocurrency issue, the financial sector is more engaged to want to engage with the law, engage with the matters, and even challenge it as much as possible. But creative, and I can understand the apathy too, because if you check the commercial in Nigeria now, not a lot of people can come and buy a literary work for $1 million. Like, we don't really have that kind of value system yet. But that also speaks to the fact that creatives are not engaged. We're not being in the forefront of these issues. And so because people don't have an interest in, not a lot of people share that interest, we tend to swipe it under the carpet and then just leave it for whenever it happens. So I think a lot of engagement by the industry has to take the lead in saying that we are relevant, we are here, and we want to be heard. And then all of these things have to be done, as the laws are being promulgated, but also understanding that we are talking about 54 countries. There's just not a lot, there's a lot of concessions back and forth that needs to go on, because a lot of people, like even working with 10 people is hard enough. I can imagine what 54 people will seem like, and then 54 countries. So there's just so much involved. But also I would say that if you want to get involved, you want to understand how it affects you, you need to get engaged. And we also need to outline, what you want to correct. The creatives need to say, okay, so what will happen to me? So in Nigeria now, these are the issues I have in this area. Are these things being addressed? Like, so what is important to you? Is it the liberalization of movement? Is it what tariff barriers are specific to the industry? And then you say, okay, this is what is this. This is what we suggest will be the difference. And then that will cause us lawyers to be more involved. But I think for us lawyers, we're waiting to see how the negotiations pan out and then see what is drafted, because that will tell us if it's viable or not. Because we in Nigeria, personal law in Nigeria can be a bit unpalatable, because you seem to go to the routines of doing the same thing over and over again. So if we see something that is, not run of the mill, all the things that we have on paper that doesn't necessarily impact people's lives, if we see that there is an understanding by all member states that things have to be different for it to actually make an impact, then I think a lot of us will clamor to that, because I think it's the future. And I think if it's done properly and it's done well, and I'm looking at all that has happened, and I think it's going in the right direction. I think even to come to this level of conversation at this point means that a lot of work is being done, and a lot of willpower is driven in that direction. So I guess just engage and outline what you want to see, and then engage on that level. And then don't let the society determine for you whether art or creative arts is interesting or is important or not. Define it, and then we'll catch up. I guess that's one of the approaches you can make.
Thank you. I mean, this has been such an interesting conversation for me, even directly. So as part of the Abuja Literary Society, we are very passionate about assisting creatives or supporting creatives in improving the livelihood from their art. It's informed the theme of this festival, which is making artwork, and trading services or trade under the AfCFTA will definitely be one way that Nigerian creatives can just make a better living for themselves. We've discussed a range of issues, and I think that they're all very important. Would like to see to what extent we can follow up with some of the discussions here. So, I mean, between some of the recommendations that have been made from the panelists, we'd like to see if we can follow up with some of them. So we may be reaching out to you directly. We're also going to be uploading this discussion online on YouTube, but also as a podcast, so it can serve as a reference and it can reach a lot more people. I do reckon that for a lot of core creatives, for example, the average ALS member, which may be a 21-year-old poet from the University of Abuja, I know some of the terms may go a bit over their head, but then like you said, we have to start from somewhere. We have to start engaging. On our end, we'll start to talk to people about the AfCFTA as well, on the different platforms that we have, during the different discussions that we have, as just something that they can begin to consider in terms of trying to put their work out there, or their content out there. I'd like to end this meeting now. I haven't seen any questions. I don't know if it's because our panelists were very clear, or we're just quite interested in the conversation. Maybe I'll give another 30 seconds for questions. Does anyone have any questions? You can type in the chat, you can raise your hand, or you can unmute your mic. Swedi, you're trying to say something. You're saying it has been clear? Okay. It has been clear for Swedi. There's a hand up. Oh, Francis, would like to say something.
Yeah, just quickly. So just to say thank you to Tese. I think it's Tese on the club room thing. I'm actually quite impressed, and I think thank you for taking the lead on that. And I really invite everyone here. I mean, it's our collective responsibility. We've got a team of about 30 people serving 200 million Nigerians, so it's not easy. And Onyinye, great points. Great points. And the task of making the language easy is something that is a work in progress and is continuous. And like Tenny is volunteering some time with us. We welcome volunteers in any way, shape, or form that we can work to push this forward. So I would say thank you, all of you, for all you're doing. And yes, we look forward to getting more support from you.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone. Thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you for coming, together to discuss this topic. I reckon that I suspect that not many similar conversations have happened. So hopefully this would be one of the first few of many to come, even as we try to engage creatives more in this very important process that Nigeria as our country, but also that the African continent is embarking on. I'd like to wish you the very best with the rest of your days. In terms of the festival, we're now going to be having our poetry grand slam. It's one of the anchor events for the festival. So it's a Transcorp Hilton starting from 7 p.m. and poets are going to be competing for a total prize of 350,000 naira. We invite you to also join us tomorrow if you'd like to. Tomorrow we have a book and art fair at the Cube Cafe. It's free entry for the book fair. But then in the evening we have a panel that is going to be organized in person. So it's going to be the only in-person panel because it's a keynote panel for the festival. And the theme of the panel is making artwork. We're going to hear from very young, creatives that have found ways to earn a living for themselves and for others from their art. And then we'd have the closing session, which is going to be a music concert as well as a dance concert at Mamba Cafe in the Maitama Amusement Park. Thank you for everyone that joined us. Like we said, the recording is going to be online, so you can eventually share it with others that you think may have some interest in this conversation. We're also going to eventually extract the audio into a podcast, which sometimes it's easier to consume versus a YouTube video. Thank you to our panelists again. Thank you for honoring our invitation. It was such a high quality panel. Like I'm actually amazed with everyone's expertise. And yes, we hope you have a good evening.
Thank you, Tenny. Thank you, everyone.
Tenny. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Tese, Francis, Tenny. Take care. Okay, Francis, Merry Christmas.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Tola. Good to hear from you.
Same here, brother. We'll talk soon.
Yep.
Talk soon, Tola.
Bye.
Tese, take care, though. We'll talk soon.
Take care.